Okay, we now have a quorum. Dr. Duran, it's you. You're up. You're up. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. We do improvise coming on, so thank you. We're very glad to be here to talk about our equity plan and our resources. As you recall, in December, the board passed an amendment to dedicating some monies that were initially allocated for an assistant superintendent of equity. And then that was at the mid-year budget. And then later on, those same monies were passed in another amendment to be dedicated for fiscal year 19. So in thinking about our equity plan, didn't want to just hone in on those monies, though. We wanted to think about what is the best use of all of our resources and how, do we best align our support around equity in our new structure. So before you is a document that I'm going to go through real quickly because I really want this to be more of a conversation and hear feedback from all of you. So essentially, the equity resource and initial plan has three components to it. The first component is, which I'll talk about in a moment, is the additional resources that we were proposing to be added. Currently, we have 3 positions in our system that are dedicated 100% to equity. But I need to say and reiterate that all of us are charged with making sure that equity is a part of our work. Having said that, we do want to identify a few resources. So we did some looking at other systems and divisions, and I'll talk about those resources in a moment. Second part today, I will review our beginning thinkings about our equity profile, which is what you may have heard of as a dashboard or as a data overview. We chose the word profile because that is something that scorecard, you may have heard it called that as well. Profile is how VDOE tends to call their information as well. And then the last page is the page that I think is one that I would really welcome to hear feedback from board members on. And this is the work that needs to take place over the next several years around some topics that we really need to dig deeper into. We're not digging deep into them today. We're simply trying to make sure that we've captured all of those big buckets that we need to think about over the next couple of years. Also, I want to say that this plan was developed not only in looking at best practices of other school divisions and around the country, but it was also looked at from the One Fairfax policy that was passed last fall by this board and the Board of Supervisors. So you'll see on each of these pages reference to that policy. So on the second page, that's up there. You can go to the second page. Don't have control of the cursor here, sorry. On the second page, these are an outline of the positions that I was proposing that we include in our equity work moving forward. As I indicated, we looked at various school districts across the country to see what are some of their best practices. And what you'll see here is a combination of what we learned, not only from them, but also some of the work we've begun here and how do we expand that work. And we tied this to also our strategic plan. When we think about the cultural proficiency work, that is an area outlined as a desired action in our strategic plan. And that is when we've begun to do some amazing things under the team who are here in the back, Nina Thomas, Nisi Harvey, and a new addition, Tia, who's here, the 3 of them, under the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement. So thinking about the work they've done, we thought about how do we expand that and then what are best practices for how it's expanded. So when we looked at many districts, we mirrored a lot of this work around what's happening in Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. They currently have a very similar model. They have a director, and then they have 6 specialists who are assigned to work at all of the various schools. So you'll see our model is almost identical to that in terms of the proposal. But before we think about just cultural proficiency and ensuring that staff have that capacity building around what is it that they should be looking for, first and foremost from within, but also looking at data and looking at individual situations and or school-wide situations that are involving equity, we also need to make sure that we look at our instructional services and ensure that we have quality curriculum that is inclusive of all of our students and their backgrounds, and that we're working towards what we've committed to many years ago in closing the achievement gap, which I know this was going to come after our strategic plan conversation, but you'll see in that conversation later today that closing the achievement gap is a major driver for our work. And so we have a framework with 6 drivers in that. And so in order to better do this work and enhance the work, we have an amazing team of people, and they're all sitting throughout here, some, and then many others, who've been working on closing the achievement gap. But we're proposing to have a program manager who could help and assist with making sure that we are collaborating across all of our offices. You're going to hear later today about the proposal for the Office of School Support and how this individual might bring together all of that work. A second position would be a resource teacher who's dedicated to really looking primarily at our curriculum, aligning it, revising it, designing it so that it includes representation of all of our students. And so we would start this work in the social studies content area and really begin to look at where do we see our students not represented in the curriculum. We, a couple of years ago, did a literacy audit, and we would do something somewhat similar, where we would do a curriculum audit as we're looking for, again, cultural representation of our students. And this resource teacher would allow us to be the person who's a point person for that work and work with all of the teams on that. We have an amazing group of resource teachers in our curriculum office who help write curriculum. So this individual would simply augment and support that individual in digging deeper at the representation side of cultural proficiency. Then as we move to our Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement, this is the model that mirrors a lot of what we saw in Montgomery County, where they have a director, in our case it's a coordinator, it's just a different title, but it's the same concept, and then they have 6 specialists. In this proposal, we're proposing 5, and 5 because we have 5 regions. So we would then have 1 specialist for each region who could begin and to dig deeper into the work that's already been happening right now. And one thing we realize as a team is that we've been out training and working with various administrators and staff, but we haven't done that with the board. So we would love the opportunity to have a time to do some cultural proficiency training with the board. If you so choose, we would love to set that up maybe at a future retreat or something of that nature. We also, in this model, saw the need to have a school-based liaison. And in this actually came from a group of teachers who recommended this to me. And thinking about looking at best practices, looking at other schools, looking at One Fairfax policy, I also met with a variety of groups, organizations, representatives from principal associations. We had teacher representatives, faith-based, university partners, and worked very much closely with MSAOC on this as well. And I know that Ms. Howard had requested to be here to share her thoughts on this plan, and with the time change, hopefully she'll be able to be here in time to share her thoughts from the MSAOC. But in those conversations with teachers, one recommendation was we really need a school-based person who can be that point of contact for us in this work to get more professional development and be that person we can go to as we're really digging deeper into these equity issues. And as we know, with the great diversity that we see across our division, each school has a different equity challenge or group of challenges. It's not always the same division-wide. So we really need those individuals to help unpack what those might look like at those schools. So in this proposal, we're proposing that we would have a stipend for a teacher at each of those schools. And for our secondary schools, the 3 of them, we would have 2, one for the middle and one for the high. And they would, again, receive additional professional development and support. We would also be having an Equity Institute in August, on August 8th, where we would bring together teams of about 600 teachers from across the division to kick off this work. And it would mirror some of what we've done through our literacy symposium and those types of things that we have over the summer. Bringing an expert, we brought an expert previously to our principal meetings, and that was Dr. Sharaki Holly. And he was very well received, and many principals are actually trying to find ways to bring him back. So we would bring him as the expert to this Equity Institute. So that's $750 stipend position. And then the last recommendation of the positions would be for a family and student ombudsman, and then a support person for that individual. So that's where you come up with the 7 staff. When you look at ombudsmen, we did a lot of research on ombudsmen. There are 3 basic types of ombudsman. There's an advocate ombudsman, there's an organizational ombudsman, and there's a traditional ombudsman. What we're proposing is an organizational ombudsman. And as is defined in the research and the literature, an organizational ombudsman is an independent, confidential resource where families, students, and parents can go to this individual to try and find how do they resolve a conflict, how do they go about understanding the system, where do they go for the right supports that are needed. This individual is not like an advocate where they then take on that case. You may have heard of advocate ombudsmans in many government organizations, for example. They don't take on that individual and then go and advocate for them throughout. And in the traditional sense, they're not legislatively in our system requiring us to have one, so they don't have any legislative authority to then listen to the case and make a finding. They are simply an organizational individual who can help with navigation as well as capturing data for us and making recommendations for us on where are the patterns that we see we may need to make some adjustments to better serve our families and our students. So you might think, well, that's 7 positions. I know that didn't come out of $249,000 amendment that Ms. Hines and Ms. Falchek presented. You're correct. That $249,000 amendment really only covers 2 of those positions. The other 4 of those positions would be coming out of some of the savings that we would occur through the Office of School Support that they're going to be talking about later today. And then the stipend money would come from there as well. And then 1 position we were able to, within our own monies, look at that, and that would be the AA assistant for the ombudsman. That one we were able to find monies from within. So 2 positions is all we would have been able to do, but rather than to come to the board today and say, well, with that 249, here's the only 2 positions I think we should recommend, I thought it would be more helpful and useful and effective for us to think about what's the best practices that we see and how can we really move equity work forward outside of just those 2, and then find a way that was somewhat cost neutral to present that plan to you. So that's why you might try and add up and say, that's a lot for 249. You're correct, it is, because it is not 249. It's actually about, inclusive of the stipends, it's about 770,000 when you include all the stipends in there and the positions. But again, that would come out of those other areas that we're talking about later today that as Mark presents, I think right after me. So the second item is our equity profile. And under the One Fairfax policy, we are directed under the policy to really not only look at our data, not only disaggregate it, but to publish. And the key word publish, and you'll see that at the top of the 3rd page, where it specifically says incorporate and publish performance measures that can be analyzed, quantified, and disaggregated. So we're not just going to be publishing our data, we really need to have it in a way that could be disaggregated for our public. So the equity profile, and we have a PowerPoint that we're going to show you now in a moment, is intended to do just that. As we thought about this, though, we said we don't want to just put data points up on the equity profile for us to look at. We want to make sure that those data points are directly aligned to our strategic plan. Later today, you're going to begin to look at some of those metrics and talk about those metrics as it relates to the desired outcomes in the strategic plan. We are going to tie in those data points into our equity profile, but make them in a way that can be publicly disaggregated and analyzed. So in doing that, we are not presenting today the equity profile complete because you haven't completed the discussion of the strategic plan. And again, we don't want to choose separate data points. So what I'd like to show you, if you can go to the PowerPoint for me, and then we can actually just go into the mock-up plan. So while they're bringing that up, the first page of the mock-up on the equity profile mirrors very closely what Albemarle County has for their equity profile. And their equity profile, once we bring that page up, by the way, I will be giving to each of you a login and a password to play with so that you can look at it and give us some feedback on the actual framework. And let me say it's all over the place in bold, and it's on the document I'm about to give you. The data here is not real data because we're not showing you the profile complete. We're showing you the framework because we want to get your feedback on that. And the key here is about being able to disaggregate and analyze data in a way that's meaningful. So on the first page of the profile, it's a cover page that has all of our student population broke down. Let's see, we're getting there. Okay. And again, it mirrors Albemarle County, so you'll have all of our subgroups broken down along with all students. And then you'll see a few categories. You have advanced academic program, students with disabilities, English learners, and economically disadvantaged. And then if you click on the English learner link for me, you can see how it will further disaggregate and tell you a little bit more about what does that population look like. So when you click that on, it can tell you by their levels, how many there are, as well as a breakdown by their race of the English language learners. So it's a way to disaggregate deeper into, again, an overview. It's an overview page of what do the demographics look like of our students. Then following that, the next 4 pages, we've given you one sample, and the sample we've given you may not be the actual data point we use, again, waiting till after we hear from your strategic plan conversation. So the next 4 pages are directly aligned to the strategic plan goals. So we have goal 1, and then we have, for this one, we chose student pass rates on SOL reading, and then you can see that. And you can also disaggregate it and analyze it by clicking on different groups that you might want to compare. Maybe you want to look at all, but you might not want to look at all. You might want to just compare Latino to white, or you might want to just compare Black to Latino. And you can click on the different links and see how that disaggregates it. Each time you do that, on the far right, on the top, it looks like, I think it's called a sandwich, right? Is that what it's called? Hamburger, thank you. I always call it the wrong thing. It's called a hamburger, technical term. When you click that on, it will actually allow you to download whatever you've disaggregated into a PDF or into a picture, a JPEG, or you can email it to somebody if you would like. So it allows you to play with the data to really dig deeper in and see from an overview of the whole division as well as by certain subgroups that you're looking for. This is going to be a division-wide report. We're also going to the next phase after we get this set up is every single school has a profile page currently with data points, but we're going to be mirroring the school pages to what we have here. So if you're interested in looking at a school, maybe you have school X in mind, I don't want to say a name, but just school X, and you want to dig deeper into that school's data, you can click on that school's name and you'll have a similar ability to look at these same data points. So goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and goal 4 of our strategic plan. What are the metrics and the desired outcomes that, again, we're going to be working with you all over the next few months, and then we'll identify some of those to put on here. That's essentially the equity profile. And again, I'm going to give you in a moment this to play with, and you can send me some feedback. And the last part of today's presentation is the very important part, and I think this is really the part of the work that's ongoing, and that is for us to really look at what are the areas that we're going to begin to analyze and look closely at for equity issues, for inequity issues, for resource needs, as well as making any changes to policies or initiatives that you would like to see. And again, at the top of this page, you can clearly see that that is a directive in the One Fairfax policy, that we begin to dig deeper into these areas. So I have chosen at the bottom of this page some buckets of high level. These are not set in stone, and my presentation today is not to tell you these are what they're going to be. My presentation today is a beginning part of the conversation around what are we going to look into? When are we going to prioritize these various things to look at them? Similar to what you'll see and you have seen in the strategic plan conversation, there's short-term, mid-term, and long-term. What are we going to dig deeper into? So you might ask, well, if this is not what you're presenting as the final analysis, where did you come up with these? I pulled these out of the 17 areas in the One Fairfax policy that was passed by both boards, as well as listening to conversations that you've had at the work session table or at the school board table. These were all areas that have come up over and over again. I will also say, as you can see, some of these are areas that aren't necessarily under the academic realm. Some of them involve my colleagues because as I started today's conversation, equity is owned by all of us. It's not owned by one person or one office. So some of these things you'll see, for example, diverse workforce, and Dr. Ramey and his team have begun doing some work on that. So that not necessarily under the academic side of the house, but it is something that we are digging into and have to make some decisions around policies, initiatives, and or programs as it relates to that. So this is the part of the presentation that I really welcome hearing your feedback on, and I think we have about an hour, a little over an hour to do that. I wanted to go quickly through this four-pager to give you the opportunity to give us your best thinking and your best feedback around those three things. Again, number one, the positions. Two, the profile, the framework for the profile. We will come back as we hear more and understand more what the strategic plan desired outcomes are going to be and what those intended metrics will be. And then third and last, these areas that we're going to be looking at in terms of policies, initiatives, or programs. So with that, I think we have an hour and 5 minutes to hopefully get into some good conversation and questions.
Okay, Francisco, and just to be clear, the board members can address all three of those.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to start with Ms. Hines, followed by Moonshine, then Karen Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. And I do want to just start with a huge thank you. This is a significant commitment and something that I think we've talked about for a long time. And I think we understand why it's such a significant commitment, because it is everybody's work. You're right. So this is not easy to pull together. We know that it's worthy of the time that you've put in and the investment that we're making. And I think it gets back to that idea of excellence through equity, is that this is not only important work for those kids who may be in the margins somehow and that we need to keep a closer eye on. It's also important work for the whole system, because we know that if everyone is doing well and everyone is learning together in an equitable way and everyone is challenged, then the whole system is better off, every child, and the community is better off for it too. So thank you. This kind of investment in positions, this investment in communication and coordination is remarkable, and I think it's more than I hoped we would start with. So thank you very much. I might have hoped it, but I don't know if I would have imagined it. I also would say yes to cultural proficiency training for board members. I think we should do that. I'm happy to volunteer first for that. Just a couple things I wanted to mention. I'll try to be quick. I did send out an email over the weekend. I want to thank Dr. Brabrand very much for your response about the MOU on our SROs. And this is our school resource officers. We have a memorandum of understanding with the police department about them. And we have all received communication from the local branch of the NAACP with some concerns. And I know, Dr. Brabrand, you sent an email to the board talking about what you're already doing and what you plan to do. So I'd be happy to give you a minute to update us in public right now if you want to.
I can share with you that I met with the police chief and county executive today. We're beginning to review our MOU together. We have some ideas that were generated from the discussion that was had in the community, raised by those in the community, including the NAACP. And we're working to schedule a time with them for one of their future meetings to come out side by side, county and schools, and share our school data and our public safety data, along with what we're doing well, some trends and strategies that we can get better, that will include looking at the MOU for some potential revisions.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be keeping an eye on that on behalf of the community. So thank you very much. One thing I would point out in that conversation, there's been some discussion about whether or not the advocates had good data and whether they presented good data. And I think, the point of having the profile is so that our advocates in the community no longer have to be stymied by the challenge of using good data to make their points, right? You should not have to have a friend on the school board. You should not have to FOIA the school system. You should not have to be an independent expert. You should be able to get that kind of important data from our website. And this is the opportunity that I'm so looking forward to going through this and seeing how it works. Thank you. A couple of next steps. The third page where we talk about, what comes next. Now that we've got the structure in place, we've got the people in place, or we're getting them there, what are we going to sort of work on next? And that page has a grid with, I think if I'm counting right, 12 12 different areas. I am advocating that we begin with advanced academic programs. I think of all the things that we do that actually make the situation worse. The way we do advanced academics is at the top of that list of something we do that actually makes it harder to achieve equity. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to dwell on the negatives here, though, but I think there are a couple things that I would recommend that we do soon. And Dr. Brabrand, again, thank you for taking on one of these already and getting started on it. And that is how parents who don't know find out about advanced academic screening and how they make sure that their children have that opportunity. Because we all know that there are parents in the know and there are parents not in the know. And that right there creates this huge equity challenge in our system, because once your child is in the AAP center system, they are in a parallel, separate school system from 3rd through 8th grade. And we don't like to talk about it, but the fact is those parallel, separate, and unequal school systems are segregated by race and family income. That's the reality. It has been the reality since the 1970s. When the AAP Center program was first developed. We don't do it intentionally, but after so many decades of that being the outcome, we are responsible to fix it. I think, so one thing, I took a look at the website, and I think as we work on fixing that structural problem with our AAP centers, I think we also need to recognize there are kids growing up in the system, and there are families who don't have access. And so I took a look at the website, and I'm a knowledgeable person. I taught what used to be called a GT class. I've taught in the school system, elementary. So when I go on the website, it should be easy for me to figure out what I would do as a parent to make sure my kid has all those opportunities. And I spent an hour, and I had to toggle between different pages and take notes to come up with what I think should be immediately and easily available on the website, which is you click here, and it goes through chronologically what happens, what can I do as a parent. This thing happens, what can I do as a parent? It should be easier. So, and I appreciate that Dr. Brabrand has taken that on. I would just say, I think, when we develop it, I would suggest that it be tested, one, by parents who are very much in the know. Just put it in front of some of those parents who we know everything there is to know about AAP and see if there's anything we're missing. And then also have it tested by parents who know nothing. And see if it's actually working for them. So the last thing I will talk about is those sort of longer-term strategic reforms of advanced academic centers. I think we can fix this. We don't have to continue to create a separate and unequal school system in order to meet needs. And so I think as we look at it, we need to try to meet 3 goals. One is that we are meeting the educational needs of learners every day in every classroom, because kids do learn differently. They do have different backgrounds, and we have an obligation to meet all those needs every day. Second is that we protect vulnerable parts of the county from further middle-class flight, because the reality is in a lot of places we have put these special programs there to keep middle-class families in that part of the county. Keep them from moving to another part of the county, to keep them from going to private school. It's a tool, a strategy that we have used to correct for housing patterns that affect our school system in a way that is not helpful. And then finally, I think one of our 3 goals in reforming the AAP Center program should absolutely be that we reverse the segregation and inequality that we create with our AAP Center program. So that was a lot of talking and not a lot of questions. I'd be happy to take any responses that anybody wants.
Just in response in general terms, first of all, one thing you talked about was what is equity going to be addressing and who is it going to be looking into? And we had a lot of conversation about how do we define equity, and we had a lot of discussions about that. Ultimately, what we've chosen to do on the first page of this, you'll see, is use the definition in the One Fairfax policy, which goes well above and beyond race. It talks about neighborhoods. It talks about gender. It talks about religion. It talks about a variety of things. So I hear, as I went out to meet with various stakeholders, I often heard, well, So this equity plan is about who, about what, and it's an inclusive piece around making sure, and as Dr. Brabrand has said once, every child by name and by need. So working to ensure that every child has what he or she needs to be successful. And if there's a reason why they're not being successful, that's a programmatic issue. You raised some concerns that you just shared, whether it's a policy issue, whether it's a resource issue, then that's where we as a board and as a system need to dig deeper and make some commitments to doing that. Now, you talked about the advanced academic programs. That's one of the ones on the last page, and I want to hear from everyone on that. As we would approach all of these, what I would say to you is that we would come with data. We would dig deeper into what's currently existing. We would also have stakeholders who are involved in that, getting their feedback. So as we came to a work session or whether it was a school board meeting on these topics, that's why it's going to take 2 or 3 years for all of them, not necessarily for one. We need to have that real conversation. That's why I'm not presenting right now today what's the solution or what is the problem. Some of these may not be a problem, but they are required of us to look at from the lens of the One Fairfax policy. And some we do know are a problem because we've seen the data that's told us that there's some inequities in them. So as we approach all of these items, using the one you gave as an example, Ms. Hines, we would do it in a very data-rich, comprehensive way. The experts, I'm not the expert on these, I would bring the experts from these various areas to the table and help facilitate that conversation and facilitate making sure that we have all the data you need to make a choice moving forward. That's an informed choice, and that's one collectively as a body you believe is in the best interest of our students.
Okay, Mr. Moon, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders, then Ms. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. McAlvin. Then I'm going to start with some of the things that Ms. Hines already stated, especially about parents in the know and parents in non-know. I mean, I really agree with the points you are making. It's not just advanced academic programs and timeline, process, what to look out for, but it's all aspects of student achievement in how to raise your children. I remember, raising my own 2 kids who have done pretty well in the school system, that I did get a lot of information from older parents who had raised their kids 10 years before I was doing, and got a lot of good information. What sort of summer programs you should be looking at, and how to, in order to get into those summer programs, what you need to prepare for. How do you work with your children on a daily basis, and etc. Those were all the very, very beneficial information that I was able to get from older parents. But I think, not all parents do have such older parents as advisors to give you advice and information, etc. If we could find somewhere on the website that, for people, especially those in the non-know, that they can click on and say, oh, this is what I should be doing to prepare my child for this program and that program, and this is where I can go to get some help. I mean, that would be wonderful. It's not just AAP. It could be many other things. It could be a music program. It could be art program, sports. Immersion. I don't think we do have that on our website. Probably, parents could get some, help from talking with the counselors and, school administrators, even teachers. But parents may not know how to do that either. So I would love to have a site where they can click on elementary school, second grade, some of the examples, and get all those information out in at least 7, 8 different languages. I know I'm putting you.
And if I could say something to that, that's exactly what we saw the organizational ombudsman role do in many of the districts around that we did some research on. Mm-hmm. They actually provided a mechanism to look at the information that was publicly available and to make some recommendations on how they actually met with parents, they met with groups and found ways, they met with individuals and the staff to say, how can we better share that knowledge from their lens? So that what you're describing is exactly what they have done in many of the
even
divisions.
Before the person gets to meet with the ombudsman, if there is a site where they can go and see, get the information, and then contact Ombudsman for clarification, further explanation, and more guidance.
Well, the ombudsman in these cases, they just proactively looked at
do
to
that.
see where there were holes
Okay, that
missing
is-
to make
that
sure
is great.
that they needed to.
So that's a suggestion I make. And since you mentioned the Ombudsman, I did send in some questions regarding
Yes.
the roles, especially, respectable roles of Ombudsman versus school board members and our, EAA, school board office, and et cetera. So what is the relationship between that Ombudsman and our roles as board members?
Well, again, thinking about the three types of ombudsmans, and this type is the organizational one, their role is to, because they're not the advocate one and they're not the traditional one under the definitions and the research around what an ombudsman would be. So in an organizational ombudsman, their role is to complement and support your work and support all of the staff to making sure that they're a link and a resource. When each of the traditional ombudsman roles that you might think about, they tend to have a legislative charter, and that they follow. This person is not going to have that. This person rather is going to have an expectations around what their responsibilities are. And first and foremost, it's when they encounter someone who calls their office or emails them, have you spoke to the right person? Do you know who the right person is? Let me connect you with that person. Let me make sure you know the system. Let me make sure you know where to go. So oftentimes, EAAs and school board members, you might be able to handle these on your own, and that's fine. But if there is a constituent or someone who doesn't know where to go and who just has maybe multiple problems, this would be a good person you could refer them to and say, here's a constituent who has some really serious things. Can you help them navigate the system, go who to talk to, so that you or your EAA don't have to get online or a website or try and call and figure out in the org chart who they should go to. So it's a supplement and a complement to that, to making sure that they are an
So
independent
is that
resource.
okay? Are you in any way suggesting that that when school board office, our EAAs or board members get inquiry and asking for information, etc., we refer them to this ombudsman, or
No, you don't have to refer them, but if you need to, if it's a situation or a case where you might not know, because I bet you a lot of times, and this will happen at schools and departments, people call with a concern that you can handle and take care of it. So you would still do that. You would still handle the situation and take care of it. You would only refer when it was a situation that was very complex, or you might not know where they need to go to get the help that they might need.
usually we send it over to superintendent's office when
Right,
it's so
right.
complex. But now we can send it over to ombudsman.
Correct.
as a-
But the expectation wouldn't be you refer everybody that you get contacted, because if you can handle and respond, then you handle and respond as you normally have done.
Okay. One more question has to do with these altogether 10 positions,
No, seven. Seven additional.
additional positions plus 3
Plus the 3, 10 total, you're correct.
Yeah, 10 total. Is there any overlap of the work of those 10 people plus other hourly positions with now something that we have not discussed yet with the Office of School Support? The
Yes.
18 positions, is there
Yes.
overlap? And
Yes, the 5 of the cultural responsive specialists that will be assigned to each of the regions will also be assigned in working with the teams that you're about to talk more about with the Office of School Support to help build their capacity, either the team's capacity itself around equity and cultural proficiency issues, or the schools that they're serving. Also, the program manager for closing the achievement gap would be a person who helps with the collaboration between ISD and what's happening curriculum-wise with the Office of School Support. So it would be liaison and a person to be intermediary to support with that collaboration.
could I have just one quick follow-up? I know that you asked, that $770,000 is to support 7 additional, or just support all 10 positions?
7 additional plus the stipend is included
so
in that number.
770, and only 250 has been
Right, 250.
designated by the school board.
Correct.
The other 500,000 you are seeking out of that $3.2 million that you will be talking later on.
Some of it is from there, and some of it is from the title. There's 3 positions out of Title II, which is actually kind of connected to that. And then there is 280,000 of that 3.2 that would come to this office from what you're talking about later
Okay,
today.
I'm gonna wait until when
Because
I
as
get
I
to
because as I said, if we were just doing the 249, it would only be 2 positions,
understand
not
that.
7.
I'm gonna wait until I get to office what is it?
Office of School
School
Support.
Support to ask about impact
Okay.
of the $3.2 million coming out of schools to support
This
what you're
one.
trying to do plus Project Momentum.
Okay, that's fair.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to have Miss Judy Howard. Is she here? Come on up here.
So Ms. Howard, as you know, is the chair of the MSAOC, and as I indicated, I met with various groups and many stakeholders through this process of developing this, but one group I worked very closely with was the MSAOC, getting feedback from them and also their thoughts, particularly since they all have members who represent you. And so Ms. Howard had requested of me if she could also share her thoughts on this plan as it relates to MSAOC being the chair.
Hi, I'm sorry. I got into and checked my email about a half an hour ago and found out that it had been moved up, and so you get me in my casual form without my notes. So I just will make a comment to you, Mr. Moon, that regarding sort of the information that parents need. MSAOC could not agree with you more. As you may remember, that our charge is to begin to update our parent advocacy handbook to provide all that information and identify the kind of information that we want to make sure that all of our parents have. So I'll use that to plug for funding for the MSAOC handbook and to be able to expand on that effort that we've been working on for many years and have as part of our charge. So we are updating it this year. In terms of Dr. Duran's plan, which he and I have spoken about, and he did present to our committee 2 weeks ago, his plan after taking suggestions from the committee as well before then. We think it's a good start. There's nothing that we disagree with it on. We think all those positions are necessary. We think that those positions should already be here. So these are not positions that are sort of a revelation to us. Many of those positions are positions that we have been advocating for years. And as a start, it's great, but don't stop there, because if equity really is going to be guiding the school system, and as a theme, you just can't give it just lip service, and there's a lot more that needs to be done and considered over time. One of the things we do have a concern about is under the current organizational chart, we have a chief academic and equity officer. And that's Dr. Duran, and in making this recommendation, it in no way reflects on him because we think he's doing a great job, but we see an inherent conflict of interest between being the chief equity officer and the chief academic officer. The chief equity officer should be looking at everything and responsible for looking through an equity lens at everything in Fairfax County Public Schools, not just academics. He has to have the authority and the ability to look at all aspects of this school system, and particularly relating to our teachers. If we're going to look at minority student achievement, which we have, and if you recall in our report that we issued in June, we spent a lot of time talking about teacher hiring and retention, and we don't see anything in the current plan that addresses that, and that's something that's essential. We think that a chief equity officer should oversee the civil rights issues relating to hiring, retention, and the like. There needs to be, when we talk about an ombudsman, we need to have some central locale where parents, students, teachers, anyone has the ability to report any issues or concerns that they have. We don't just need somebody who's going to show you how to navigate the system, but we need some ability to be able to report bias incidents. If you look at many colleges and universities now, they have reporting systems that allow you to do that, and we would like to see something apart from the current system of claims for discrimination, because every claim is not a discrimination claim. But then again, all of that needs to be brought under the same umbrella. The other thing in supporting the current plan, we'd like to ultimately see a reorganization that incorporates looking at equity, adding an Office of Minority Student Achievement that brings together under one umbrella, once again, all the different programs within the school system that relate to minority student achievement. Right now, for example, we look and we ask, our members ask, why is Title I being under the Chief Academic Officer and Project Momentum, which we have overlapping schools, under the Deputy Superintendent? We have no answers to those questions, and we'd like to see some better alignment where we're using our dollars efficiently to monitor issues that are of concern with us. Again, I don't want any of this, our continuing concerns and critiques in no way should detract from the proposal that Dr. Duran has made, because we do think it is an excellent start. But again, it is a start, and please continue your efforts to expand that and to give equity and the position the gravitas it needs to be effective in this school system, and to develop an accountability system that really makes this school system live the words of One Fairfax. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Howard? You're welcome to stay. Don't move. No.
Thank you. And Ms. Howard, I want to thank you personally. You have been such a strong advocate for these very important issues for at least a decade, if not longer. And so I think that the community really does appreciate what you do, and for sticking with us. We may not be as fast as you'd like, but we are trying. And so thank you for being here today, but more importantly, thank you for all you've done and continue to do. Now, to Dr. Duran's presentation, and also to address some of the comments that Ms. Howard's made. I actually think the Chief Equity Officer for the system is Dr. Brabrand, and that a metric for Dr. Brabrand, and something that as we went to hiring a new superintendent, equity was a major part of the discussions with each of the potential candidates. And so I think that the Chief Equity Officer is actually the superintendent. What I do think is important is that every member of the leadership team should have, as part of their performance metrics, an equity metric. And so I think that that ensures shared accountability across the whole leadership team. I also wanted to thank Dr. Duran for using the term inclusion, because so often we focus on diversity, but we don't talk about the other half of diversity, which is actually how do we ensure inclusion in all of our programming, both academic and non-academic programming. And so having an inclusion model which addresses the need to make sure that we include all of our underrepresented populations, that'll be important. And I wanted to just clarify that when we talk about the multicultural studies, that we're not only just focusing on one aspect of multicultural studies, but that we actually, as part of our rich history, talk about the great contributions that some of the underrepresented populations have made, including African American, Native American, the special education, as well as LGBTQ. And so I would hope that as you go down that path, that you actually look at an inclusion model in our our work. And I would point you into the direction of a recent meeting that took place amongst they called it the Big Five, the largest plantations. They met outside of Atlanta, Georgia, with the historians from each of those plantations, as well as the ACLU and the Historic Black Colleges and a number of other groups, to look at the social studies curriculum on a national level. And I would encourage you to take a look at what those findings of that meeting were. Regarding your ombudsman, I see that as a great advocate and a great ambassador for the system, but there needs to be a feedback loop to make sure that once the request comes in, that there's follow-up, and we've actually documented that follow-up, because so often many of us will hand things off thinking, okay, we're done, it's off my plate, and that's the natural reaction for so many of us because we are all so busy. So it add to that. And then regarding the AAP centers that Ms. Hines brought up, I think it's important, but I would urge that we look beyond just the AAP centers to the access to rigorous programming across the whole county, because we have this monolith that says AAP centers, but we actually have very different models for advanced academics depending on what region of the county you live in. And certain AAP centers actually look a lot more like are much more inclusive than others. And so I would suggest that we not only look at what the traditional model is, but look at what's been done elsewhere in some of the more economic and socially diverse areas of the county, and also look at our local level 4 programming and what has been done with those. I see that you listed our Young Scholars model. The Young Scholars are important, but we've chipped away at the Young Scholars for a while. And so we don't have the Young Scholars programming during the summer and things like that actually were put in place to achieve that magic picture that we all look at of the children looking over the fence and making sure that we create equity by giving giving opportunities for programming to try to balance things out, or at least to have that access to those programs. And I would urge that we look at opportunity gaps rather than achievement gaps. Because the opportunity gaps, if we address the opportunity gaps, we will be addressing the achievement gaps. And then finally, and this goes back to some of the conversation earlier regarding the outreach from the NAACP on concerns about student discipline, I would hope that we would not only look at, we would take a deeper dive in student discipline, not only for where charges have been raised against a child, but more importantly also where we are taking the opportunity for diversion first and restorative justice. And so when we look at that dashboard, doing a bit more of a deeper dive in creating that information on the dashboard rather than just keeping it on a chart of a standalone.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz?
A couple of questions. Can you go to any of the examples that you had where you were showing your chart? Where you were doing
the equity profile?
Yeah.
Oh, so you'll need to go on to the other.
I apologize. While we're waiting for that to go on, the reason I want to go take a look at that, and I understand the data's not real. It doesn't. Yeah, that's not.
You'll have to go to the login.
Yeah, that's not what.
Keep going. They'll come over and bring it up.
Right, get into one of those examples.
She's coming over now.
The reason I want to go into that is I'm concerned that if we're building this or we're
building
creating it,
yeah,
that we provide up front. Now, I don't know if this is proprietary, if we're building this in-house, or if this is an off-the-shelf product.
We're building it through our website vendor.
Right, but is it a proprietary program to manipulate our data, or is this an off-the-shelf program that can use our data?
I believe it's our own, it's our Drupal program that we're using to create our own, correct? High charts through Drupal?
Basically, it's a tool that utilizes our existing data.
Okay, so it's
and this is a prototype, so we're looking at making sure that this is the data that you want, and then we'll put it into the formal program.
Correct.
Can we look at one of the charts that had like a disaggregated data?
This one disaggregates by, and they all have disaggregated data. So do you want the SOL one?
There was a fourth grade
The
example.
SOL? Okay, so scroll to the SOL.
And the reason I'm asking this is because there are subgroups that are part of that chart that's perfect. That's perfect.
Right there.
So my question is, can we make sure that we're building in the ability to sort of N of, so what's the N? What are we talking about in terms of the total number? Like when you place it on, there you go. Okay. And then are we able to N minus? So, and the reason I ask this, go back ahead and slide back down. Because when I look at economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities and English language learners, and oh, by the way, you may have, an ethnicity there. You want to know, because you could have a Hispanic, economically disadvantaged English language learner who is a student with disabilities. So this is not a clean Venn diagram, is what I'm trying to suggest. Right. And the ability to annotate that if you've pulled out, so if you have all, I'm maybe the gray, I can't tell, the gray or the black or whatever, at the top is all. And then you're trying to compare that to, say, Hispanic performance. It's all versus Hispanic. But then if you pull out students with disabilities, that becomes a comprehensive, and it becomes very complex. And so whatever the all is, we have to be able to have all minus something. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. When we're looking at the data, because all minus economically disadvantaged is going to include white students, is going to include students with disability. You see what I'm saying?
That's what you're saying.
Okay. So that's kind of something I want to highlight on that. The second is, now can we go back to the slide that we were at with the
review and assessment page?
The
review
12.
and assessment. Okay.
Thank you.
It's the last page of the first document.
It was slide 4 of the
of the first document. Yeah.
The concern I have there is we don't have any attribution of money or scope for. I mean, it's very easy to have the puzzle wheel, and the puzzle wheel has all even pieces. They're just different colors, and it's all represented in squares below when we eventually get there. But they're not all that here. Yeah. These are not all evenly distributed in terms of cost and scope.
Correct.
So, for example, the FCPS on, that is a massive scope, massive amount of money issue. And so if you slide up a little bit, if this is on the same slide, that's the hard thing. It's nice to have a visual representation, so it sort of breaks it down.
That's our closing the achievement gap framework.
I know, but we go visually in this presentation. We go straight from that to below, which is everything fits neatly in a box, and we don't have the magnitude of the problem.
You're correct.
Laid out or represented in any way. We have attributed no money. No, if you want to implement this, this is a 2-year, a 5-year, a 10-year commitment, or the scope of it is 189,000 students, or the scope of it is,
You're absolutely correct.
And that becomes very important in terms of, it's essential in terms of calculating what your priorities are. And I'm not saying that you hit the biggest dollar priorities first. It may be that some of the lower dollar, bigger scope in terms of the magnitude of number of students that you can make a difference for are the things we do first. And we, these big dollar things, they may be interesting, but they're big dollar, big liability, big this, that, and whatever.
And some of these aren't necessarily.
But may have a much smaller scope in terms of the ability to impact difference. Sure. And so I go from that to this issue of the money. And it's something in our 2x2s up front. This is not something new that I'm saying. It's all well and good to say that it's $770,000, but it has the 280 or whatever from the school board. That's 1 year. It's 1 year. And so you're talking about recurring funds when you're talking about buying bodies. So it's not 1 year. It's from this point forward, you're adding to.
That's correct.
And I'm concerned that when I look at the history of, and we always say minority student achievement, but it always includes 2 students with disabilities, which the performance of students with disabilities is always at the rock bottom. It's the orange line I refer to. That we're talking about putting somebody in each region that is a cultural responsive position. Why isn't it a student why isn't it a minority student achievement position? Because do you want to be culturally responsive or do you want to affect student achievement? We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on minority student achievement and we haven't moved the line. So I worry that this reflection is we're going to put somebody with a culturally responsive label on in each region, and we're still, I don't know, we're still not naming the problem. I'm looking up at the wall, student achievement goals. Is it about student achievement and academics, which is, the top and goal 1? I'm worried about, we said earlier in our previous presentation, words matter. If we go out there and try to say, well, we're placing bodies in each region to be culturally responsive, that doesn't say that we're going to affect student achievement and that we're concerned with where the student achievement gap is and has persisted. And
right,
so I don't know that I don't know that we're using our words wisely in terms of what it is that we actually want to do. We want to actually can we go back? I don't know, maybe it's too hard. Go back to the slide. Why do we have the lines here, 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 and here? Why? Is that what we want to affect? Do we want to be culturally responsive, or do we want to take the lines and bring all the lines up?
Well, part of the work of the culture responsive specialist is exactly closing achievement gap. They actually go in and work and looking at the data, helping to think about practices that we could be doing better.
But see, when you're explaining,
so that person actually is a complement to the work of what's going to be happening in the Office of School Support. There's good research out there that shows if you can really, through the PLCs, our professional learning communities, look at and disaggregate the data to see which students,
Dr.
whether it's
Duran,
special ed or whether.
So
this person
I
is.
want him to have an opportunity to finish, to respond. If Ms. Schultz, were you done, Dr. Duran?
Okay. I actually wasn't finished. I wasn't ready for the response.
Sorry.
So really,
at some point
I know. So really, the question though is still, if the focus is on where we're attributing the money and that we're saying we're attributing money by region to a position whose role is to be culturally responsive, I think that that's something that's in a list that has an ellipsis or some commas to it. But I think at the forefront, it has to be about minority student achievement and students with disabilities. I don't know what the acronym for that is. And students with disabilities achievement is altering that achievement. Part of it is being culturally responsive, but that's not all. And so I think we put the wrong thing at the front of the sentence or at the header or something, that our goal, our mission has got to be to stop spending hundreds of millions of dollars over years and not affecting minority student achievement, and students, but to affect it, and to affect it and move things positively in a different direction. Now I'm finished.
Nice. All right. The only other thing I would add that was really important about was not just culture responsive, there's also culture responsive and equity specialist. It's got both in their title. But I agree with you. If it was just that alone, no. But we are working together as a team with Office of School Support and how we look at achievement gaps. Also, the strategic plan clearly outlined for us one of the desired outcomes was cultural proficiency and responsiveness. You're going to be talking about that later today. If we as staff are being asked in the strategic plan to implement cultural proficiency across the entire district, we can't do that with 2 people. So having these 5 individuals dedicated to each region is our way of saying we will implement the strategic plan and ensure not just cultural responsiveness by in and of itself, but looking at how students could be more successful. That's the end goal of cultural responsiveness. It's really looking at the data, helping staff understand practices. What are some ways that we can better support all students? And all means all, minority students, special ed, but there's other issues as well. Some cases, the culture responsive specialist will work with teams about those students that are on the high end of the spectrum. We have some students that are very advanced that aren't getting the supports they need. Looking at the data, helping think about that. You might have a school that is predominantly students that are struggling academically, but there's a small population of students who aren't struggling and they haven't been getting the attention that they need. So that's a role of this person as well, building capacity for teachers to really think about, are you serving every student by name and by need? And that's why we feel this is important. 1, because of the research. 2, because it's in our strategic plan as a desired action for us to make sure we're seeing division-wide in every school. And 3, because we know if you don't disaggregate and look at the students and help staff with that, and we have staff who haven't worked with very diverse populations until recent years as we've seen the demographics change. So we need to help them be better, give them the tools that they need to be successful.
We hear you, Dr. Duran. I think Dr. Brabrand wants to say something.
I just have 2 little things. One, I want to call that a drop-down menu because nobody knows that it's called a hamburger.
So we need to. Can you do it like in 1 minute? Because
Yes.
I think you talked for about 20 minutes.
And
15.
I don't think so. But
Okay.
and website, I think I still fundamentally believe we have a very serious problem with the navigability of our website. It is impossible. Ms. Hines, I think, is the one who brought it up. People now just go to their search engine to find what's on our website. We have to be able to help parents, highly educated, not whatever, navigate and find the information they need on our website, and we still haven't addressed that. So those are the last 2 things I have.
One thing I would just want to say, overall, we've had data for a long, long time. Our challenge has been a fidelity of implementation problem. We're putting in place through the strategic plan, through this equity resources plan, and through what you're going to hear Mark talk about, which is Project Momentum, we did in a small group of schools, the ability to give every region the support staff in place to then go do something about where we see inequities happening in our data. That's the challenge. When I had 27 schools, I could go out and go, oh yeah, look, you got this. But I had nobody to direct, to do follow-up work, to go, you need to look at your instruction, and I'm going to be back to see what this looks like. Now it's scaled to 40 schools. 1 or 2 people in an office can't come back and track all that. This is pulling together across departments now for the first time and putting the data out for both the public and the schools. It's not just enough for the region to know. The public needs to know what our challenges are, and something Mr. Moon said, we need to be more proactive to give our parents a chance to partner with us about here are the good things you can do to help us. The other part is I totally agree, Ms. Schultz, you hit the nail on the head. Some of this is more expensive, some of it isn't, some of it's going to take longer, some of it, but we didn't want to get the cart before the horse. The strategic plan work will help us in some ways drive which of those boxes you all want to go to first, and we didn't want to get ahead of the board. I felt very much at the very beginning of the year when we did the strategic plan, it was clear this is an hour plan, and I didn't want this plan that we would debut that we were getting ahead of you all about what would be first. We wanted to hear what board members said. Is it AAP? Is it classroom, not courtroom, and discipline data? and then help that along with you reviewing our strategic plan to give us the short-term, midterm, and long-term goals around equity. Thanks.
Ms. Strauss?
Thank you. First of all, I think the outlines for this are wonderful. And it is time that we go back and provide more substantive staff for each region. We have needs all over the county that are not being met. And as we've, over the last 10 years plus, as we've cut support to schools, this is what happens, and you get to the point where, as students move throughout the county, as our demographics change, and we're frustrated because we can see unmet needs. We can just see them, and there aren't enough hands to fix it. So going back to a staff plan where you actually have enough hands to get in and actually work classroom by classroom, teacher by teacher, in a more specific, targeted way, I think is the way to go. So I think it's great, and I look forward to seeing how we roll it out. We certainly have needed a much better way of looking at data, collecting data, being able to see it, disaggregate it. I agree. We always have the difficult part of a student who checks off 3 or 4 boxes. And, we've looked at that in several different ways, but we do know that a student who is from a background of poverty, ESOL, et cetera. In other words, the number of assets that you don't have, the more difficult that it's going to be. So whether or not, how well we can tease out each one of those, that would be cool. And that has just been a challenge. In looking at the staffing model for this, and then also looking at the strategic plan and looking at the metrics, I'm glad that we are going back. A lot of these metrics were ones that we looked at 10, 15 years ago for a whole variety of reasons, but that's another 30-minute speech. We quit looking at them, but I think many of the things that we're putting back in as proposed metrics, I think will give us valuable data. And Ms. Howard, I want to thank you for sticking with MSAOC. You've been there since we invented it. And I think... Yes, because I remember that well. We met at Page Avenue. And I think there were only 2 years when your wonderful husband took your spot, but otherwise you've been there every year. So thank you very much. She's my appointee. Very proud of that. My colleagues have raised a lot of other issues. One of the interesting things, when we talk about making sure that there is equity of opportunity and resources, many years ago, when we looked at AAP, we began to take academic areas out of sort of, are you identified as center eligible? We took math at the elementary level off of that. In other words, if you were appropriately placed to have compacted math, then go for it. Years ago, we took reading and language arts. In other words, you are taught at whatever level you are at. If you're reading chapter books in first grade, great. So it was much more flexible. And I agree with Ms. Hines. We don't want to have a separate parallel track going where, the opportunity never meets. And that realistically never meets the needs of kids, because there are not that many people who are actually profoundly gifted across all areas. But children will have different needs depending on where they are in age group and interest and passion, and will need opportunities for enrichment, for acceleration or extra help, what have you, flexible grouping, however you want to do it. So when we talk about equity of opportunity, that becomes very important. And I think we've all agreed that making sure that every school, every part of the county, where we have fidelity of implementation is really, really important. And that we are just constantly responsive to change. Our kids and our families move all over. We have different expectations for outcomes for our kids. So I am very pleased with the outlines for the plan. This is the beginning. It's not the end. And we clearly needed more positions, and we needed to take a look at ourselves to see are we committed to actually doing this work and having a viewpoint so we can actually take a look. Now, I understand that with the new state requirements, we're going to see more schools in the yellow area, which again shows a different sorting of schools. And I guess we're not going to know that until the spring.
April 16th work session, we'll be having an update on the SOA changes.
Right.
And we'll also be providing each of you the schools, what they look like currently based on predictions from the state, whether they would be yellow, red, or green, and in which area. So you'll learn more about that in April.
But the short answer will be there's going to be less red, but there's going to be more yellow. And the state accreditation standards are going to demand that we have a systematic school district response to any school that is flagged yellow. And this is another part of the reason, honestly, in a crazy way, the timing of the equity work of OSS, which is Project Momentum, we've been doing it 4 years. We've been getting great results. We've just been doing it in a small number of schools. We're taking it to scale across all of our schools, across our regions. And really, we're empowering our region assistant superintendents, not just to talk about equity. Nina has this PowerPoint. It's a great PowerPoint, and she can talk. But you actually got to go back and find out what happens in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Does the teacher deliver instruction in a way that all kids can understand it, and then if they're not, to give them the supports? You need a team of people to do that. We've had people over in Sloan's shop making great stuff for a long time, but we barely have enough people to make the cookies. Now we got to go make sure the kids cookies is probably the wrong example for healthy. Carrots, spinach, the good stuff. We've got to have people monitoring that in classrooms and then helping. Ooh, that's not quite it yet. And when you're trying to teach that, you need that frequent feedback and coaching. It doesn't just happen automatically. Culturally responsive. Teachers want to do it. Not all teachers know how to do it. Mm-hmm. We've got to follow up and make sure we have the people in place to go, that's not quite it yet. I know you're trying, but here's where you need to get to. And I think all these things together are merging in a way that is really going to help us get to these new performance targets that we're developing in the strategic plan, how we can start. Because look, MSAOC, their bottom line is we've been talking about this for 15 years. When is the needle going to move? OSS has been moving the needle the last 4 years, but we only are doing it in 30 schools. So we need to expand that model across all of our schools with an equity person as part of the team. Right. Not just thinking about it for science, English, social studies, but thinking about it from an equity lens. That's the brilliant part. Francisco, Mark, they've started to integrate their thinking instead of all this silo stuff that, frankly, sometimes has held back our school system. Now, there were reasons with the areas we had 4 school systems, and I understand why Dan Domenech said, look, we can't keep that going. But we've got to cross-matrix, we've got to cross-collaborate, and that's really what you're seeing happening here with an equity focus. And that's what Francisco is bringing you now. People who are going to have an equity lens as part of that team, and a person in each school. A person in each school with that equity training going, hey, we are not there. We need to get this done. I think it's going to help.
Thank you, Dr. Rayburn. I agree with the approach.
And I'll say on the SOAs, you'll see about that in April, but the biggest area of yellows you're going to see is achievement gap, which is a new area that SOAs require us to look at. So that's why this work is very needed. And as Dr. Rayburn said, it's all of our work. We've got to better collaborate and work tight around this, because we're going to see more and more schools. And some of the schools you'll see are schools that normally have been schools you thought of as having an achievement issue. And so now there are many.
And that's actually one of our problems. Our mindset's been, we're okay. We got no problems. Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on what lens you're looking at. Our special education piece has been an issue. It has been the Achilles heel in this system for years and years, and we spend a lot of resources on it. We need to show better results for the resources that we put out there, and we're putting a framework in place, I think, that's going to bring better accountability and better equity through the system.
Dr. Braybrand covered my points. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Next, we have, because we've had a lot of passionate discussion. So we next have Dahlia, then Sandy and Megan and Niharika.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Duran and Dr. Braybrand. And I won't repeat some of what was said, but kind of want to add a little bit to the conversation and I guess get some
questions. I had a great conversation with Ms. Howard this weekend and agree with a lot of the enthusiasm for the initial plan, but also do want to get a little bit more of those questions or when we can see that vision coming for the future plans. And I guess some of it would be, I think it's great and hope we can move forward with adding these positions. Some of the questions around that would be, and I think my colleagues were trying to cover that a little bit. It's, yes, the academics are a very big part. But if we are saying that it's about the opportunity gap, right, and not just the achievement gap, then how do we ensure and provide that structure and resources and oversight so that HR is there, so that facilities are there, which I remind you is how, we first started to see inequities in our country in education. We ensure that extracurriculars, which are, arts and languages, we have not just AAP, but when I've looked at those numbers for students in our immersion programs, that is even much of a bigger gap there, right? So I feel like in words, the plan is kind of explaining where we're going, but there are some bigger questions when we look at the chart, when we look that equity is now technically just in the office, even though I think we've got the right person for the job. How do we really ensure that in every region and every aspect of what we do for our students, I believe in Providence District, we don't have a single language immersion program within the district. So where are kids going to access programs, right? So some questions of why does Dr. Duran, and hopefully you can explain, report both to you and to Dr. Lockhart when none of the other cabinet members do, or is that an across the board, or they're working together, right? So, well, I'm not a big fan of hierarchy. That's how we run our system. And so how do we really envision the first steps? Looks like we're on the right track, but we know that, and the skills that get our kids career and college ready aren't those SOL tests, right? And so if we continue to base it on that, how are we ensuring, right, that we're really addressing that whole child, that we're really getting kids access to outside opportunities, to enrichment opportunities, to extracurriculars, to sports, to music, to language. I don't see, to disciplinary concerns, right, to training for parents to advocate for their kids. I guess those are the kind of the summer programming. Those are the questions that I'd like to maybe hear. What is our vision for how we get to show that we really are looking at an overarching opportunity gap and how we empower our staff to do that. So I'll leave it at that kind of higher level for you, Dr. Brabrand.
Francisco and I, it's always who's going to go first. I want you to say whatever you want to say, so don't feel like you need to hold back. One of the pieces I want you to know is a lot of this is about using the resources we already have in schools and getting the full leverage from them. The best principals right now
are sitting behind you. Just so you know.
The best principals right now in elementary schools bring AAP curriculum into their base schools, okay?
That's exactly.
Folks, did everybody just hear what I said? Mm-hmm. The best principals bring the good stuff right on down. Sloan's folks, let me tell you something. I've been in classrooms on my Fridays. The science curriculum at elementary school has been so overhauled since I left, and it is out of sight. These kids in 3rd, 4th grade doing lab stuff that I did in high school. We got the good stuff. We just need to be sure now that we're giving it to every kid in every classroom. Then we're not going to be hung up on what program. We're going to still have great programs. Not saying we're not going to have great programs, but we're not going to be hung up that I got to get in a program to get to the good stuff. So part of it is leadership. Part of it is following up to see that leadership's doing the things that we want. And we've been structured in a place, and I'm just saying, it was 27,000 kids for me and Debbie Tyler and a half a secretary. Now it's 40,000, and a couple of schools have two Debbie Tylers and me. That's not enough to then go out and actually get it done. We're creating through the OSS and the equity plan teams that are going to be able to do that in every region. And I think that's where a lot of this is going to happen. Now, are there still some resource pieces like extracurricular activities? The only school that has embedded activity period every day is TJ. All the other high schools, right? I mean, all the other high schools, hey, it's here after school, get it if you can. So our best and brightest kids get it embedded in during the day. How do we get there? Those are some of the deep questions we're going to have to ask. And so that's a resource one. But a lot of it is creating the existing resources and being sure people are leveraging it much better than they have before. And really knowing what they have. Not every principal. When I became principal, some of the stuff I didn't even know we had. I don't know, Nita, did you want to say something on that? Take that microphone.
It makes me think about the work that I have to do and this team is going to have to do, because everybody doesn't know the answers. Everybody doesn't know how. And it is going to be our job to push a little bit, to widen the lens for people to even want to see, what am I missing? Who am I missing? To ask the right questions. What am I assuming and someone is missing as well? So, you think about, we have all these students in Fairfax County, and they are so diverse and so different, and they all have different needs, and we are missing some things. So putting that on your radar, I know that Dr. Brabrand has come here, and all of a sudden, we have the license to have conversations. It's like, now let's talk about it. And people are being made to feel slightly uncomfortable. And guess what? It's okay. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay not to know everything and have all of the answers. But guess what? We're going to talk about it anyway. And that is just the beginning to making sure that we ask the right questions of our teachers, of our administrators, and even of our assistant superintendents. We have to ask the right questions so that we can get down to the bottom of what our students really need. Our work is to widen the lens. That's the beginning.
And I would just add a couple of, you asked about other departments, HR and facilities and whatnot. I think that's a good conversation around what's coming up in the strategic plan, when there are metrics there that we're going to be discussing, desired outcomes we're going to be discussing, because we all own, I started this conversation, we all own equity. So how are we all being held accountable to that? We're saying that in our strategic plan, and Marty and his team have done some great work around bringing together some baseline data, some metrics on what that will look like, and then the board and all of us together are going to commit to, here's some changes we want to see. That is then what we're going to take from there and put into this equity profile to show publicly, for transparency, that we're all trying to meet these outcomes and achieve equitable opportunities. But I think it's not just, I agree with you, Ms. Corbett, opportunities, but I think it's opportunity and achievement, because sometimes they're very different. Sometimes they are connected, but it's also sometimes just being able to have access, which is an opportunity piece. But even when you do, and what Nina was saying, there's some students that have access and opportunity, but they're still not achieving. And so why? And so that's the deeper questions that we have to ask. But I think you raised a good point about it's not just in academics. It's certainly not. And Dr. Brabrand has made that very clear with all of us in our strategic plan conversations. I think is where that's been very the forefront of our conversations is, what are we all going to do to see better outcomes? And what are we saying we're going to commit to do?
Right, because
Ms. Kiesgemar was looking at me, so I think we're over about 2 minutes.
Can I just respond really quickly to that? If that's okay. I know I stopped last time, but I won't this time, because this is
what I think. You had a lot of time this morning.
I know. I wasn't the only one. Thank you. And I stopped. So I just think that, to me, this is what we need to spend much more of our time on. Okay. So I guess what I want to say is I agree with what you're saying. And other than ensuring on those dashboards, we have the metrics that we can ensure whether, some of it is DSS. Where are students going for their post-high school career? What are they doing? What do they have access to? So I just want to make sure that we have within this future framework, that accountability in everything we do, and not just in the testing and not just in the academics, but that the structure is there and that we revisit this if this isn't working, and that we as a board are able to really follow those metrics and support that.
This is the exact conversation when we get to the strategic plan. We have original metrics and revised metrics, and to give us feedback. Are these the right metrics that push an agenda for excellence, that push an agenda for equity in the school system?
And who's accountable for each part of that? That's the other big one.
That's why we're putting in for the first time performance targets that weren't in the plan. If you got a plan and there's no targets, you got no accountability. You don't have a plan. We're going to have a plan with accountability. You're going to hold me accountable. The good news is this board has no problem holding me accountable.
And lauding you.
Thank you very much. This is incredibly important work, and I appreciate you bringing all these resources to the work. One of the top concerns I believe we have to address now is socioeconomic resegregation. It's something that this board has not addressed front on. And I would hope that this would be an opportunity. Dr. Duran, you know this is the very first thing I raised with you when you first came on board. How long ago was that you came on board?
2.5 years.
2.5 years, and we had a little meet and greet, and that was the first thing I threw out to you. This was something that we need to deal with. We don't have control over housing patterns, but we do have control over our schools, and we do need to make sure that we are not isolating our kids in schools that are high poverty, high mobility, high ESOL, at the same time that others don't have those challenges, because we do know that it makes a difference. So I hope that this gives us an opportunity to address that squarely. Do you see that as part of your mandate, Dr. Duran?
Well, clearly it's also part of One Fairfax policy, one of the 17 areas, and I know you were a champion of that as we worked to write that, and I remember meeting with you on that, and that was an area. So it's definitely an area that's part of this work, because it's one of the 17 areas that we have to address. But I don't think we, meaning just the school system, that's one that we have to join with the county on to really have a conversation about.
I agree with you on that. At the same time, we have our responsibilities, and we need to address it however we can. And I don't have the solutions in my head, but I think the first thing we need to do is say this is an issue, and we will find solutions for it. That's the first step. I agree with those that have talked about fidelity of implementation. I won't belabor it, but I'm delighted to hear Dr. Brabrand talk. Well, he's left, but delighted to hear him talk about how important it is, because whatever program it is has to be the same in every school and in every district, regardless of who the students are or where they live. So that's something we still need to work on. With the Ombudsman, hooray. Hooray. I have been advocating for an ombudsman since I came on the board in 2010. We came very close to having one slightly differently constituted, but I think this is a great step. I think that's something that we need to having a person for someone to go to. My one hope would be that this would be a high-profile person whose name and whose face is right there on the website. So anybody who says, as Mr. Moon said, somebody who's just, I don't even know where to start. I've seen on our website the contact us, it's tiny little print, contact us, and you go there and there's like a laundry list of things you can do. And if you don't know that AAP is now AAP, not GT, you can't even find that. So I think having an ombudsman as, if nothing else, just where the heck do I start? Mm-hmm. Where do I go? I do think it will be important to make sure that we understand how this relates to our current client communications, because we put things into client communications. Do we now put things into the ombudsman? Does the we just need to know how that's going to interact, so we're not duplicating effort. So I think this is a great start, having an ombudsman in this is under you then, Dr.
Correct.
John. Okay.
Correct.
So I think it's great having this ombudsman in your shop. I think it's something that we'll have to watch to see. As I mentioned to you, Montgomery County has had an ombudsman since the 1960s, and it's worked very well over there. I gather this is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be more like a traffic cop.
Yeah, it's a little different. It actually is mirrored directly to Portland Public Schools. We're modeling this identically to what they do with their ombudsman, which is more of the organizational one I described. Montgomery County's is a little bit more like the advocacy one that I described.
But I think this is a great start. So hooray for that. And the last thing I'd mention is a small point, but on the AAP page, I had a constituent suggest that we put a mission statement on that page, and that was something that you were going to take under consideration. I don't know if that's something that you've reviewed at this point.
Yes, I received that and shared that with our AAP team, and I see Noelle in the back nodding her head. So they are looking at that and how we can better have that as a statement that's more upfront on the webpage.
Great.
So
Thank you so much.
You should see some change to that soon.
Thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Okay, first, I know that there was a shout out to Judy Howard and your time on MSAOC, but I would like to broaden that appreciation a little bit deeper. Having served as the liaison for 2 years with the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee, I know that former chairs Bob Shaw, former chair George Becerra, along with staff advisor and liaison Larry Bussey, for years and years and years and years, have been advocating for Fairfax County to please be intentional. That the lofty language, the lofty desire wasn't good enough. And so when I brought this to Karen Garza over 2 years ago, Karen Garza's solution was to simply say, well, I want to get a strategic, initiative assistant superintendent, so we'll just tack on equity to it. And so I'm sorry Dr. Brabrand's not here right now because, one of the things that we postponed hiring that position until the new superintendent was hired. And so to everyone around here who knows what this has been all about, we wouldn't be sitting here with Dr. Duran's amazing, draft plan here if it weren't for a superintendent who finally gets it. And a chief academic officer like Francisco Duran, who has served in some of the larger metropolitan areas like Philadelphia and San Francisco, you get it. And we hadn't been doing it. And so when I think about Nina, you've been like the one-woman shop to cover the 10th largest school system in the country. I mean, everyone should consider this to be, finally, Fairfax County is going to put its money, time, resources, and commitment to something. So I just felt like it was really important to drive home this point. This has been a long time coming. And, Ms. Evans, you wanted the ombudsman. I've been pushing for this thing. And, I'm glad that it took a superintendent to get the 12 of us to get so darn excited. I mean, how many times was this brought up during budget time and this board sat there and looked to the superintendent and did nothing because the superintendent didn't want to do anything. So that's the first thing. Okay, so this is great, but now what? What are we going to do with it? I want to point out to everybody in my time here on the board, I've been very worried about what are we doing to ensure that our best intentions are effective. And one example is the Young Scholars Program. For the 6 years I've been on with everybody else around here, how much have we talked about the Young Scholars Program? What are the metrics that have said that it's working for us? Is it accomplishing what we want? I mean, thankfully, in the next presentation, we're going to get, a conversation with Mark Greenfelder, who's doing phenomenal stuff with Project Momentum. But, here was something that Fairfax County's had in place for a while, but it was well-intentioned, but what's been the analysis to say it's working? I want to point out to something that Ms. Hines said, the AAP program. I would go a little bit further because I'm in full agreement with you about access. What about advanced work in general? I know that when we look at the number of kids taking part in I'm not sure what's going on.
Well,
I'm like, I know there's some activity behind me, but I don't know what it is. So
no, I
can take a breath, Sloan. How's that?
No, I appreciate it. Just one brief comment, because obviously we need to look at all of our programs and examine program efficacy. But to the Young Scholars Program, one of the things that I think is a challenge for us, and it was discussed earlier, is we've disinvested in some of the activities, like some of the summer programs, some of the after-school things. But if you actually look at the Young Scholars data, over the last several years, we've increased the number of students that are actually in level 4 programs now by 300% for African American students and 200% for Hispanic students. So if we could actually get young scholars in every school and start to invest in some of those enrichment activities, I think it's actually a strategy to help us with some of our equity goals. But you're 100% right. We need to look at all of our programs through that equity lens, and that's one of the things that, certainly my department is committed to working with Dr. Duran on.
And I appreciate that, because one of the things that Dr. Sloan said is we don't have it in every school. So how are those students to be successful if it doesn't exist for them? Number one, I know we don't have immersion in a lot of the schools too, which is something, but we have been asked as a board to be accountable for why TJ's demographics look like they do. And so even by having young scholars, even with the growth in AAP enrollment, TJ still looks like TJ, and that has been a problem. Mr. Moon, I'm really appreciative of something you said, which is parents in the know. When I was a young parent with my 3 sons, I had no idea what the AAP program was. Never heard of it. And my husband and I both have graduate degrees. And my first 2 boys, they were labeled level 3 school-based. No problem. I didn't care. Then when I found out talking to the school counselor, oh, well, even though your sons are in advanced math and showing all this high aptitude, you could have referred them. No one told us that. I mean, so if no one's telling our family that, how else is anybody else supposed to know that there's the referral program? And then to Ms. Hines' point to all of the board members over the weekend. So people who are in the know, and then they go spend money over George Mason, that's expensive stuff. So now you're talking to Ms. Evans' point. It's not just, the ethnic diversity and disproportionality, but now you've got socioeconomic on top of it. So I loved Ms. Hines' suggestion earlier, which is if we're going to keep accepting George Mason or outside testing for referral into the AAP, then I think this board needs to look very carefully at what are we going to do for providing for our free and reduced lunch population students so that we don't have the socioeconomic disparities that we see in the AAP. Something else that was brought up is the school improvement plan. If we want our equity work to be intentional, then I hope, Dr. Duran, one of the things your shop will think about is how can the individual school improvement plans be in alignment? What does it mean? And maybe that's part of what we'll get with Project Momentum. The use of the dashboard, it will be as good as the analysis that comes with it. So I really do hope that when you start to staff your people in these different positions, we really get some people who will go to the next level. It's not just that they're producing data, but what is the data telling us? And Ms. Schultz, you were correct. When you suddenly look at the Venn diagram of all the different overlapping populations, we need to understand what that is. The other thing, just looking at my notes, is when we talk about our students with disabilities and our underrepresented minority populations, well, they are overrepresented in student discipline. So when we, again, talk about this equity work, it's not just the academics and opportunities, but it is about what is happening with our student discipline where we have an inverse representation. And then I guess, finally, I want to drive home the point again. As someone who's been the parent of 3 recent high school students, when you get to go home to parents who have college degrees, graduate degrees, and they can help supplement either through their own knowledge or their own pocketbooks, tutors and supports for accessing advanced coursework, that puts a huge disadvantage for our students that don't have those additional assets at home. And so I think we're going to, when we talk about so much of this work, I really hope we will look to the school divisions around the country, including Albemarle, who I'm so appreciative you've been talking about. This is the first step, but then what are they actually doing with some of their solutions? Because Nina, I think you said it best. I mean, people don't have the solutions, and we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations, no doubt. But I think our schools will succeed when leadership like Dr. Duran and all of you in central administration take the best practices we can find around the country, package it, and bring it to them, not ask them to solve it themselves. Identifying the problem is one thing. Bringing effective solutions will be really, really important. So I appreciate everybody's hard work on this. You missed the compliment I said earlier. Your leadership alone. No, you didn't hear it. You weren't in the room.
I didn't hear somebody in the hallway.
Okay, the shout out.
Somebody in the hallway gave me a shout out. They're talking about you. I'm like, oh God, you step away from a minute, but it was good. That's good.
Okay, I'm going to go next just because I need to run out, and then Niarika and Pat will help with next steps. I just want to say thank you. I know as somebody has been advocating for my own 3 sons as well as other kids, I know how real these issues are and how frustrating they have been for so many years. Not to blame anybody, but, you know, we really need to get to these issues. And I encourage my colleagues, including myself, to just put your seatbelt on, because we are talking about a paradigm shift. And, you know, there are those who are comfortable with the way things are, and this is going to be a little unsettling to a lot of people. And so I think we're just switching our thinking a little bit, which is a very good thing, but I expect some pushback. Just a couple of comments with respect to the Ombudsman, really pleased with that. But I don't know if we thought about having languages available to them. We're having a number of children in our schools. I know with the courts, we have a line we can call and get an interpreter. If these ombudsmen are dealing with a number of underrepresented populations, I would think that they would need to have access to that type of support.
Absolutely, we've thought of that.
Okay. With respect to priorities, for me, advanced academics, and I qualify that by meaning, you know, making sure some of the higher level thinking is available at the younger ages, as well as discipline, would be my top 2 priorities. First of all, because I know from the few visits that I've been able to do that when we make higher learning available to our kids, irrespective of their backgrounds, they rise to the level. They achieve and they do well. I'm reminded of, I think it's Glen Forest in your district, and had a good conversation with their principal, and she's one of those schools that makes that advanced thinking and mathematics available at every level. And those kids are just, you can just see the electrons and neurons shooting all over everywhere. And so I think we have to take that attitude to all of our schools, and how we handle discipline, how we look at our students can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we really have to change our attitude with respect to that. And I don't think it's intentional, but nonetheless, I don't care how it happens, it has to stop. Okay, so let's see. I'm also concerned about the overlap of the existing work of the achievement gap, and I think we're kind of addressing that with expanding Project Momentum. But I just want to make sure, and I'm sure we'll be on the lookout for making sure we're not kind of repeating the same efforts, or, you know, working in the same, everybody handling the same potato, doing the same thing. So I just kind of want to make sure we're aware of that. And I think that's it. So, I do agree, you know, Ms. Schultz, I understand the focus on minority students, but socioeconomics is such a significant part, as well as opportunity. Where we give our kids opportunity, we do see that they will succeed. For that reason, I would not support changing the focus.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation. So my top priority would probably be advanced academics and coursework, but I know that here it focuses on mostly AP and IB. I think that we need to move past that to focus on specialized electives like computer science and other things like that that aren't technically the advanced courses per se, but provide students the opportunity to go into those fields. And I also know that in our strategic plan, we focus on capstone and kind of research experiences. So I want to see that kind of incorporated into what advanced coursework looks like, making sure that all students learn how to write like a research paper before they graduate from high school, things like that. And then on the issue of Thomas Jefferson, I think that we have programs like Young Scholars for our students in elementary schools, but I also think we need to look towards the student-driven programs. Like in my community, there's LIFT, and that's designed by students to help other 7th and 8th graders navigate the admissions process, kind of helping essentially students and parents in the know, because while we can provide academic support more generally for students at the elementary school level, there's obviously going to be some help with the admissions process itself. Like, what should you write about in your essays? What kind of test scores do you need? What kind of math problems should you start preparing for the test? And I think if we support those kinds of student-driven programs, we'll have a better chance of helping our students have more equal access to TJ through the admissions process. And I'd also like to see a 13th box, I guess, on this page regarding kind of co-curricular and extracurricular activities. Dr. Brabrand mentioned that only one of our schools has embedded 8th period time for extracurricular activities, and seeing how time, like at my base school, there's cougar time, like unstructured academic time, using that for extracurricular activities would be something I'd like to look into, and making sure that once we have that time for students to do extracurriculars, those opportunities are actually there, because many of our extracurricular activities are usually segregated by income. One big one I can think of is Model UN, just kind of the conference fees and things like that automatically prevent some students from being able to do it, since their parents won't be able to afford things like that. So how can we work with schools to make sure we have those clubs, but also make sure that everyone can participate in them? That's kind of a lot, but yeah.
Thank you. We'll certainly add those to our thoughts. So in conclusion, I want to thank the board. And again, this has been an ongoing process. And as Ms. Strauss said, it's not the end, it's the beginning. But having these resources in place will certainly help our work to be able to not operate in a silo, but to begin to work with. And I'm excited that Mark and his team are following me next, so that we can show how this is something that we must all do. We must all own this. And it's about, again, for all students. It's not about just one type of student. It's for all students by every name and every need that they have, making sure that we are addressing their strengths, their weaknesses, and how are we, in some cases, creating barriers for them, and where we see those barriers, taking them down. And we also, not just FCPS, I agree, Ms. Sandy, I agree that Ms. Evans, that we certainly have to be responsible for those things we have, but we also have to work with the county, and that's the beauty of One Fairfax. And I will say to you that since One Fairfax has passed, and as this plan is being put forward before you, the county is excited to see this and to hear from you all for me to share what you all gave in terms of feedback, because they want to take something similar and begin to find ways to support us in this work. So that is so critical. If we're going to be One Fairfax, let's be One Fairfax, not just on paper and not just on a policy and a resolution we pass, but together. And Ms. Keys-Gomara, we only went over 20 minutes, so not too bad for me, talking as much as I do.
I'm actually going to add one thing, because and when I talked about buckling the seatbelts, I was really thinking about TJ, quite frankly, and I think that's going to be very difficult to address. I already hear comments from people in the community who feel like One Fairfax can bring about a type of discrimination or quota system, whereas we're really talking about access and opportunity. And so I just think we need to be prepared for that discussion, because it's a very difficult discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I think I'm going to run next steps. Yes. Do we have any over there? All right. So first, clarify information on AAP programs on webpage and in presentations. Make webpage more interactive. And review local level for countywide. Maybe we could break that out a little bit. I think the last part, review local level 4 programming countywide, is a separate, because my only point was the website. My feeling is that Dr. Brabrand has already taken this on. I don't know that we need to add it as a next step, other than to reflect that you're doing the work. Does that make sense? The
AAP team have begun doing this work. So, I mean, we're fine to leave it there or not. It's up to you. But in terms of the first one, I know, and I see Noelle shaking her head too also in the back, but certainly this is something that we're beginning to look at already.
This was more about, I think, Ilyang and I suggested that we look at the website to make sure that it is parent-friendly for all parents. Maybe we just put it that way.
But if I could add, Mr. Moon also mentioned gathering information from successful parents, and I thought that you wanted to parents in the know and sharing that information somehow. I thought.
Sure, you don't have to go to Successful Parents to get them. I'm sure that our staff has all the information, just putting them in the right place so that all parents can have access to it.
Yeah, I took that, Mr. Moon, as you were not suggesting that we put a team of experienced parents together, right? But more that every parent should have access from staff to that information. Right. Okay. So I would say clarify information. Let's take out on advanced academic programs and just say on web page, not presentations. Make web page more interactive and accessible to all parents. Website.
You're talking about the AP website, though? What? The website in general? That's a different longer-term project, which we certainly can do. But specifically, what you raised about AAP content on the website, that's something we've begun to look at.
Okay, can we just
But the website as a whole is a
Yeah.
bigger issue.
Madam Clerk, could we just maybe limit it to what I asked for, which is to clarify information on AAP webpage, not necessarily interactive, take that out. Share information, to ensure all parents have access to comprehensive information. That's what I'm talking about, yes. On AAP, clarify selection process information. So let's go back to the beginning. Clarify selection process information. Sure, yeah, okay. To ensure all parents have access to comprehensive information. Okay, take off the share information from successful parents. Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted. And that's what we're already working on, right? Okay. Yes. All right, bullet number 2, review local level 4 programming countywide. What does that mean?
This is the fidelity of implementation and looking at the different models for not only AAP centers, but local level 4 across the county. Because what's available in a center in one area of the county is not available in a center in another area of the county.
I guess the question I would ask...
And so what we should be doing is taking a look and taking the best practices from that process. Because, for example, you can see in some of our center programs a student body that is more reflective of the demographics of the county. And it's got wonderful, rich opportunities, but it also may not have the same types of programming or level of programming. For example, trips or excursions that are available on one side versus other.
Mrs. Corbett, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but my question is this a next step, or is this going to be embedded in what we're doing?
That's what I was about to say. I would ask if you want to put up there maybe priority 1 or a priority is to begin to look at AAP from here. But that's part of the bigger conversation we're going to have. It's not, we need to bring data to show and hear from the stakeholders and whatnot. I don't want to be tied to one action related to AAP when we haven't had the whole conversation yet with it. So, I mean, I'm fine. I heard a lot of people say that of these 12 buckets that AAP is a priority one. I'm fine with that being as a next step, and discipline. But I just think putting that specific when we haven't had a chance to bring back some of the experts and people who are engaged in that work to the table with you before we make that determination.
Yeah, I agree.
That's fine, but
I also think there are good reasons why local level 4 looks a little different from school to school. So I'm not even sure what you mean by
I'm talking
fidelity
center to center.
Okay.
Well, and that's part of the conversation we can have when we bring back the conversation here, but as a next step immediate, I don't know that would be meaningful what we would give you in terms of information without having had that conversation with you.
Yes, Elizabeth.
I think that the next step that I asked for, which was the scope and the money that is potentially associated with some of these, we've got to understand that. And literally there's just a couple of boxes, just the boxes.
Right.
And no scope. And so it could be that will help us get to what the priorities are, but I'm very uncomfortable, and you just said centers, but that says local level 4. We're drilling down without ever having that sort of...
Yes, and what we don't have up here, I'm sorry, Mrs. Schultz, is your point, I don't think, which is, what is the next step? And maybe we need to hear from staff about what is the next step for setting those priorities.
Because the intent of putting these items on that last page was not to get some meaningful next steps about what to do in terms of recommendations, but it was to identify which are the ones you want to bring back to this table to dig deeper into. So I don't want to walk away with too many specific recommendations when we haven't had that full conversation here at this table.
Right, and I would say we're not going to. I don't think that's really what we set down to do, and I agree with Mrs. Schultz that we probably need more information and more of a chance to massage it and and share priorities. I shared mine, but others haven't had a chance.
I would agree, Ms. Hines, that if the intent was to come here today and sort of prioritize these for you to help you do your work, I don't think any of us came to the table prepared.
Right.
And I think the intermediary step has to be the scoping and the dollar valuing of what's here, and another conversation about how to do that.
The expectation was not to prioritize them at this table. It was to put them on the table for us to begin to think about. And as I said, this isn't written in stone. There's probably some missing here. So before we even prioritize, we need to make sure we have all of them on the table. So this was the initial thinking from the One Fairfax 17 goals, as well as some of the things I've heard from this board.
Sandy, go ahead. Do you have an idea?
Well, I was just going to say it has to be either one or the other. I raised the issue of socioeconomic segregation, which I think is a huge issue that we need to address. So I'm fine with feeling like this is simply embedded in what Dr. Duran and his staff are doing. But if we need to start laying down markers, then I would want that marker to be laid down. I'm fine either way, but if we're going to start ranking them, then that needs to be up there. So does discipline, as Ms. Keys-Gamarra raised. So I think we just need to decide if they're all in or they're all out.
And we didn't engage in enough time to really rank.
Let us put a little bit more meat on the bones of just this large plate that was shared, and then we can come back at a future work session and tease out next steps around the equity. We wanted to show you the areas.
Exactly.
We got some general comments. Part of it is put some more scope around dollars, resources, strategies that can help inform. Is it something we could do short-term, high dollar? Let us just... We just wanted to bring you the topics. Mm-hmm. Let us do some more work that helps you decide where you want to order off the menu.
And also, we thought we would be following the strategic plan conversation where we thought some of this might have come out of there. So we don't want, as you said, build the cart ahead of the horse. So.
Okay, so I'm sorry, just as a next step, could we say that as ask staff to provide another work session opportunity to set priorities?
That's perfect.
Okay, and then we'll expect more information before we do that.
Can I add one addition?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Since I was speaking. The priority I would put on there is that, and it follows up on what Ms. Howard started with, which is that we need to embed a metric in each of the leadership teams' performance. That we have this shared accountability model that includes equity metrics for everybody at that higher level. Because without having that metric front and center with every member of the leadership team, then you don't have that shared accountability and that shared vision. And so I would encourage that in the same way that we're looking at the OSS support across the regions, we have to have at the top of the house that focus and intentionality across each one of the organizations.
Okay, so I see that up there as embed a metric in each of LT members' performance, RAY, equity.
Yeah, that would work.
That will do it. And then ask staff to provide another work session opportunity to set priorities. I think Mrs. Schultz wanted to speak to that one.
And you can take, as far as
take off that other bullet.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask the embed to be to consider. To me, the leadership team report to me, the strategic plan, building equity in the plan is then the accountability that I need to give to the leadership team, and thus the equity is in it. So I'd like to keep.
So how do you want it to read?
Can we have you work with them to come up with that? Because
Work with staff
Yeah,
to develop.
just say consider developing metrics around equity for leadership team through the adoption of the strategic plan. Let our strategic plan help then drive where our leadership team members need to go based on their area versus me giving them a metric independent of the plan. I want the plan to be the driver for the organization.
Sorry, so Mrs. Schultz, did we get your thoughts on that? Ask staff to provide another work session to set priorities. Are you okay with that?
That's exactly what I said, but
would you add anything?
Yeah, because that's missing the scope. Is to scope the the proposed areas of examination.
Well, so why don't we say with underlying scoping and other relevant information or something like that? What do you think?
That would be good. I'm going to watch that. The one thing I want to talk about, we didn't get to, and Niharika may have been the closest, on the equity examination of course offerings. It's not just socioeconomic access. It was also AP versus IB, so that in an IB school, kids who are not IB, their ability to access AP classes is, much hampered, and so the ability to access, the rigor isn't just, it's that equity of a different sort that I bring up, and so it is just the full access to the rigorous courses. So if I don't need that as a next step, I'm just sharing that so that gets out there.
Okay, so let's get back to next steps. I think the fourth bullet we can erase. Look at opportunity gaps instead of achievement gaps. That is a long, difficult conversation, and
also
I think it's
part
in
of
here.
the plan. It also states that in here.
It
actually does state that in the plan to look at opportunity and achievement.
Okay, then provide info. So let's get rid of that one. Look at opportunity. Provide info showing how ombudsman cases will intersect with client communications. That's fair, I think, to ask that because it's specific. Can we do that? Okay, let's leave that one in there. Karika, did you want to talk about it?
So not just this one, but I also mentioned two more. So the next one would be including kind of extracurriculars and co-curricular opportunities as one of the priorities. And then more specifically in the Thomas Jefferson, the access portion, looking at what student-driven groups already exist to help students be in the know about the admissions process.
And then another bullet that says use TJ student programs to inform middle school students about the application process. Okay, thank you, Niharika. The other thing I heard people talk about a few times is when we see the profile, I think it sounds like we would like to have a chance to meet again and look at the metrics and the measures that are on there and provide feedback. I heard a lot of people talk about what it is we want to see. Does that make sense? To have a work session? No, I think it's more the profile itself.
The equity profile.
The equity profile. Yeah. So
and it's set to launch. We want to have it for late fall, so we have plenty of time to be able to do that. But again, we want to see what the strategic plan metrics are first.
Okay. So there's another bullet at the bottom that says have a work session when the equity profile is online.
Or prior to.
Okay, is ready to go.
Yeah.
All right. For board to review measures and metrics.
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, Megan.
Neither one of my next steps were captured, so I'd like them to be listed up there. The first one I had said is that I wanted to have staff work with the alignment of this work with our school improvement plans. Yeah, alignment of this work. Yeah. Again, I'm not dictating how you do it. I'm just saying that,
We've had these exact conversations.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Yeah. And then the second one, I think you'd stepped out of the room, Dr. Brabrand. I was complimenting that we, looked at Montgomery County, we looked at Albemarle County, but I'd like to do more than just having referenced their dashboards. I think it would be great if staff, you guys could report back to us what kind of data analysis have they done with the work that because we're going to want to understand the use and value of the dashboard, and I think we can learn from districts that have these types of dashboards, and maybe the only one who's got it is Albemarle, I don't know, but I would like to kind of go to the next layer of just, hey, this is how you actually have it be meaningful, and how do you utilize it.
We can talk about that when we come back in the work session Ms. Hines recommended about the metrics in that same conversation.
That's it. I just wanted to have that captured up there as a kind of when you guys come back, I didn't want to ask you the same question.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just so you know, we had a discussion. I had a discussion in February with Jack Smith, and we were talking about having the leadership teams from Montgomery County and Fairfax County for the first time, maybe ever, come together and have almost a joint retreat around some of the areas. We have so many things in common, and yet we're so far apart by this divide that are two different states. So we're really excited about it. LT wants to do it very much too, and we just have to pick a date, but it's going to happen over the next few months.
Okay. Karen Corbett-Sanders, did you have another?
Yeah, just two things. One, on the third bullet, it should have my name next to it, since you've got names next to some of them. Okay, so as long as that's the case. And then the last thing is, when we talk about equity, one of the pieces that we often forget about, we talk about the after-school program, and we talk about the access to advanced programming in the schools, but we also should be talking about the types of supports we provide to the schools in the form of strategic business partnerships. And that we really do have to, when we talk about equity, look at how those strategic business partnerships are brought to individual schools, because we don't necessarily have that.
Could we just make that into a next step that is different from what we're already doing?
Be fine is if we can be more intentional in our alignment of strategic business partnerships with our schools.
So I just have a question. I feel like we've gone back and forth as to getting into the details of the specific things we want to look at, and then holding off and having that conversation next. So I agree that that's important, but I feel like that's also in the list of many things.
But I don't see it as any different than the extracurricular or co-curricular.
I have the
so
same
we
feeling
either
about
have
that
to
as well.
either have to do it all, or we,
Well,
so I would just suggest.
I think the difference may be that our student representative doesn't get that many opportunities to add ideas, and that we will have plenty of opportunities to weigh in on this as we go along. And I think if we all just started listing things, we'd be here all day. And the overall next step, right, is a whole lot of work. And we'll watch, you know what I mean? I'm just worried that if each of us puts kind of our pet idea up there, it's going to be a problem.
Well, I'm just saying that especially on the business partnerships, I've been raising this for over 2 years, and we still do not have the heat maps explaining that. And so I'm just trying to make sure that we continue to make this intentional, because it is an equity piece.
Okay, well, if we're just asking you to look at it, I guess we can do that. All right, are we done? Karen.
I think we're going to do Project Momentum next, but we can take a 5-minute potty break. Okay. 3 minutes? 3 minutes? 3 minutes.